Most people grow up believing one simple idea about food. If you eat more, you will eventually gain fat. It seems obvious. The more calories you consume, the more weight your body stores. For decades, that assumption has shaped how we think about dieting, weight loss, and metabolism. But what if that belief is only part of the story? What if the relationship between food and body fat is actually far more complex than we've been told? In recent years, scientists have begun uncovering something fascinating about the foods we eat. Certain natural compounds inside everyday foods called bioactive substances don't just provide calories or nutrients, they actually interact with the body's internal systems. Some of these compounds can influence how our metabolism works, how our cells behave, and even how our body stores or burns fat. This discovery has started to change the way researchers think about weight gain. Instead of viewing food simply as a source of energy that leads to fat storage, scientists are now exploring how specific foods can actively help regulate body fat. Some foods appear to calm the signals that create new fat cells, while others may stimulate the body's natural fat-burning mechanisms. In other words, the same thing we've always feared food might actually be part of the solution. This idea may sound surprising at first, but the science behind it is becoming clearer every year. Researchers are beginning to understand how certain foods interact with our metabolism in ways we never fully appreciated before. And once you see how these mechanisms work inside the body, the entire conversation about fat, metabolism, and health starts to look very different. To understand how certain foods can influence body fat, we first need to talk about something called bioactive compounds. These are naturally occurring molecules found in many plant foods. Unlike carbohydrates, fats, or proteins, which mainly provide energy and building blocks, bioactive compounds act more like messengers inside the body. They interact with our cells and can influence many biological processes, including metabolism. Scientists have discovered that many everyday foods contain powerful bioactives that help regulate how our bodies handle fat. For example, tomatoes contain a compound called lycopene, a carotenoid responsible for the deep red color of the fruit. Lycopene has been studied for its role in supporting metabolic balance and protecting cells from oxidative stress. Another example comes from olives and olive oil. These foods contain a polyphenol known as hydroxytyrosol, which researchers have linked to improved metabolic health. Hydroxytyrosol appears to influence cellular signaling pathways that help control inflammation and energy use within the body. There are also compounds like ellagic acid, found in foods such as nuts and certain fruits. Ellagic acid has been studied for its ability to affect how fat cells behave and how the body manages excess energy. What makes these compounds especially interesting is that they don't act like traditional medicines. Instead of targeting a single process, bioactives often influence multiple systems at once. They may help regulate metabolism, reduce inflammation, support healthy cellular function, and even affect how the body stores fat. This growing area of research is changing how scientists think about food. Rather than viewing food simply as calories, researchers are now exploring how the natural compounds inside foods can interact with our biology in sophisticated ways. And as we learn more about these bioactives, we begin to see that certain foods may actually help guide the body toward healthier metabolic balance. To really understand how body fat develops, we need to look at something most people rarely associate with fat at all: stem cells. When most people hear the term stem cells, they often think of medical treatments or experimental therapies. Some imagine injections for joint pain or regenerative medicine procedures. But what many people don't realize is that stem cells are actually a natural and essential part of the human body. From the moment we are born, our bodies are equipped with millions of stem cells. These cells are like the body's internal repair system. They remain stored in different tissues, including the bone marrow, skin, organs, and even inside body fat. Throughout our lives, stem cells are called upon whenever the body needs to repair damaged tissue or replace old cells. For a long time, scientists believed that humans had very limited regenerative abilities compared to animals like salamanders or starfish. Those animals can regenerate entire limbs. Humans cannot do that. But modern research has shown that the human body does regenerate, it simply does so more slowly and in a more controlled way. For example, the liver has a remarkable ability to regenerate itself. Parts of the lungs can repair after injury. Even certain areas of the brain and nervous system have some capacity for renewal. All of these processes depend on stem cells working quietly behind the scenes. What's particularly interesting is that body fat also contains stem cells. Inside fat tissue are special precursor cells capable of becoming new fat cells when the body needs additional energy storage. This means that fat is not just passive storage. It is a dynamic tissue that can grow and adapt depending on the body's energy balance. Understanding this role of stem cells inside fat tissue opens the door to a much deeper understanding of how fat accumulates and how it might be regulated. Now that we understand that fat tissue contains stem cells, the next question becomes very important. What causes these stem cells to create more fat? Your body is designed to store energy efficiently. Every time you eat, the nutrients from food are converted into energy. Some of that energy is used immediately to power your muscles, brain, and organs. But when your body receives more fuel than it needs, it must store that extra energy somewhere. This is where fat tissue comes in. Fat cells act like fuel tanks. They store excess energy in the form of fat so that the body can use it later when food is scarce. This system worked extremely well throughout human evolution when food was unpredictable. But in the modern world, food is almost always available. When we consistently consume more calories than our bodies burn, the existing fat cells begin filling up. At first, these cells simply expand to store more energy, but eventually they reach their storage limit. When that happens, the body activates fat stem cells. These stem cells receive signals that the body needs additional storage capacity. In response, they begin transforming into brand new fat cells. Essentially, the body starts building new fuel tanks to handle the extra energy. This is one of the reasons why weight gain can sometimes accelerate rapidly. It's not only that existing fat cells are getting larger, the body may also be creating entirely new fat cells. Researchers have observed that when this process becomes overactive, fat tissue can expand quickly. And once new fat cells are created, they tend to remain in the body long term, even if a person later loses weight. This is why managing how fat stem cells behave may be a key part of controlling harmful fat accumulation, especially visceral fat, the type of fat that surrounds internal organs and has the strongest connection to metabolic disease. To fully understand why controlling fat is so important, we need to recognize something surprising about body fat. It contains incredibly powerful stem cells. These cells are not just passive components of fat tissue. In fact, they are some of the most versatile repair cells in the human body. Scientists have discovered that stem cells found in fat tissue can actually be isolated and used in regenerative medicine. In research settings, doctors have taken small samples of body fat and processed them to extract these stem cells. When separated from the fat tissue, these cells demonstrate remarkable healing potential. The process itself is surprisingly simple. Fat tissue collected through procedures like liposuction. As the sample spins, the heavier components, including stem cells, settle at the bottom while the fat rises to the top. Once separated, the stem cells can be collected and studied. Researchers have experimented with using these cells to help repair damaged tissues. For example, cardiologists have investigated whether fat-derived stem cells can help regenerate injured heart muscle. In some experimental cases, these cells have been injected into damaged areas of the heart to stimulate new tissue growth. Other researchers have explored similar approaches for spinal cord injuries. In certain experimental treatments, stem cells extracted from a patient's own fat were injected near damaged spinal tissue in an attempt to support nerve recovery. These studies highlight something remarkable. The stem cells inside body fat possess enormous regenerative potential. They are capable of supporting tissue repair and renewal in ways that scientists are only beginning to understand. However, this powerful ability comes with an important balance. While these stem cells can support healing, they can also contribute to excessive fat accumulation if they are constantly stimulated to create new fat cells. This is why learning how to control and calm these fat stem cells may be a critical step in managing metabolism and preventing harmful fat growth. At this point, you might be wondering, if body fat contains such powerful regenerative stem cells, why is excess fat considered so harmful? The answer lies in how fat tissue behaves when it grows beyond its natural balance. In healthy amounts, fat plays an important role in the body. It stores energy, protects organs, and helps regulate hormones. But when fat begins to expand too rapidly, it creates a chain reaction of biological changes that can damage metabolism. One of the most important discoveries scientists have made is that fat tissue behaves a lot like a growing tumor. Just like a tumor, expanding fat requires a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients. To support this growth, fat tissue begins to recruit new blood vessels. Researchers studying fat samples from individuals undergoing bariatric surgery observed something fascinating. When small pieces of fat were placed in laboratory dishes, the tissue began extending tiny blood vessel structures outward, almost like roots, searching for nutrients. This process allows fat to grow larger and larger. However, when fat expands too quickly, the blood supply cannot always keep up. The center of the fat tissue may begin to suffer from low oxygen levels, a condition called hypoxia. Hypoxia triggers a powerful inflammatory response in the body. Immune cells rush to the area, releasing inflammatory chemicals as they attempt to repair the stressed tissue. Over time, this constant inflammation spreads throughout the body. This is one of the reasons excess body fat is strongly associated with chronic diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, and certain cancers. In other words, the problem with excess fat is not simply its size. The real issue is that unhealthy fat tissue can become a source of chronic inflammation, quietly disrupting the body's metabolic systems. Understanding this process helps explain why managing harmful fat, especially visceral fat, is such an important part of protecting long-term health. When most people think about body fat, they usually picture what they can see in the mirror: belly fat, thigh fat, or the soft areas under the arms. But the fat that poses the greatest risk to health is often completely invisible. This type of fat is called visceral fat. Visceral fat is stored deep inside the body, surrounding vital organs such as the liver, pancreas, and intestines. Unlike the fat just beneath the skin, visceral fat sits inside the abdominal cavity and wraps itself around organs like a tight layer of padding. I often describe visceral fat using a simple analogy. Imagine sending fragile light bulbs through the mail. You place them inside a box and pack them with foam peanuts to protect them. If you add just enough peanuts, the bulbs are safe. But if you keep stuffing more and more packing material into the box, the pressure can actually start squeezing the bulbs. That's very similar to what happens inside the body with visceral fat. Even if someone appears slim on the outside, excessive visceral fat can still accumulate internally. From the outside, the body might look lean, but on the inside, that fat can be pressing against delicate organs, disrupting their normal function. Scientists sometimes refer to this as hidden fat. Visceral fat is particularly dangerous because it is highly metabolically active. It releases inflammatory molecules and hormonal signals that interfere with the body's metabolism. Over time, this can increase the risk of insulin resistance, heart disease, fatty liver disease, and other metabolic disorders. What makes visceral fat even more concerning is how easily it forms. When excess calories enter the body, visceral fat is often one of the first storage sites where that energy is deposited. In other words, before fat becomes visible around the waistline, it may already be accumulating internally. That's why understanding how to control visceral fat rather than simply focusing on weight alone is a critical part of protecting long-term metabolic health. When people think about gaining body fat, they usually assume the first place it appears is around the belly. After all, that's where many people notice weight gain in the mirror. But interestingly, scientific research tells us something quite surprising. One of the earliest places the body stores extra fat is not the belly at all, it's actually the tongue. That may sound strange at first, but when you understand the anatomy of the tongue, it starts to make sense. The tongue is made up of three major sections. The front part is flexible and responsible for tasting and manipulating food. The middle section contains strong muscle fibers that help move food while chewing and swallowing. But the back portion of the tongue is different. The rear third of the tongue contains fat tissue, specifically visceral type fat. In fact, when scientists examine this part of the tongue, they often describe it as looking similar to the marbling found inside a steak. When the body begins storing extra fat, this region of the tongue can gradually accumulate fat cells. Because this area is located deep inside the mouth, most people have no idea this process is happening. However, there is a clue. Often, the first person to notice a change is actually a sleeping partner. They may observe that someone who previously slept quietly has suddenly started snoring. What's happening is surprisingly simple. As fat accumulates in the back of the tongue, the tissue becomes heavier and thicker. During sleep, when the muscles of the throat relax, the tongue can partially collapse backward toward the airway. This narrowing of the airway creates vibrations in the soft tissues of the throat, producing the familiar sound of snoring. In more severe cases, it can even contribute to sleep apnea. So in some cases, snoring can be an early signal that visceral fat is beginning to accumulate in the body even before visible weight gain appears around the waist. Now that we understand how fat stem cells can create new fat tissue, the next question becomes incredibly important. Can we influence how these stem cells behave? The answer, according to emerging research, is yes. Scientists have discovered that certain foods contain natural compounds known as bioactive molecules that can influence the behavior of fat stem cells. Instead of stimulating the creation of new fat cells, these compounds can actually help calm or regulate the activity of those cells. In simple terms, they send a signal to the body that says, "We don't need to build more fat storage right now." One fascinating example is a compound called lycopene, a carotenoid found in tomatoes. Lycopene is responsible for the bright red color of tomatoes, but its role goes far beyond appearance. Research has shown that lycopene can help regulate fat metabolism and reduce the activity of fat-producing stem cells. You can think of it like this. Imagine a noisy classroom where one student keeps causing disruptions. The teacher sends that student to the principal's office so the rest of the class can focus. Lycopene works in a somewhat similar way by helping quiet down overly active fat stem cells. Another powerful group of compounds can be found in olive oil, particularly extra virgin olive oil. Olive oil contains polyphenols such as hydroxytyrosol, which have strong antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. These compounds not only protect cells from damage, but may also help regulate how fat tissue behaves in the body. Scientists studying olive-derived polyphenols have observed that these bioactive molecules can influence metabolic pathways that control fat storage and inflammation. This means that the foods we eat are not simply sources of calories, they are biological signals that communicate with our metabolism. What surprised many researchers, including physicians studying nutrition and metabolism, is that these foods don't simply prevent weight gain. In some cases, they may actually help the body shift its metabolism toward burning harmful fat, particularly visceral fat. This discovery has led scientists to look more closely at how everyday foods might help activate the body's natural defenses against excess fat accumulation. For many years, the common belief was simple. If you eat more food, you gain more fat. That idea seems logical on the surface, but modern research is revealing that the relationship between food and fat is much more complex. In fact, certain foods contain bioactive compounds that can actually activate the body's metabolism and help reduce harmful fat accumulation. This discovery began with a curious observation. Some individuals who began eating more foods rich in beneficial bioactives reported something unexpected: they started losing weight. At first, this seemed counterintuitive. How could someone eat more food and still lose weight? For researchers studying metabolism, this raised an important question. What exactly was happening inside the body? As scientists began analyzing these foods more closely, they discovered that many of them contain compounds that influence multiple metabolic systems simultaneously. These compounds don't simply reduce appetite or lower calorie intake. Instead, they interact with the body's natural biological processes. Some bioactives help regulate fat stem cells, preventing them from creating additional fat storage. Others activate brown fat, a specialized type of fat tissue that burns energy rather than storing it. Brown fat works like a small internal heater. Instead of storing fuel, it burns calories to generate heat and maintain body temperature. When brown fat becomes active, the body begins consuming stored energy more efficiently. Certain foods also help improve the body's metabolic signaling. They can enhance the way cells respond to energy availability, encouraging the body to burn stored fuel rather than continuously storing excess calories. Researchers studying metabolism have also observed measurable physical changes in people consuming foods rich in these bioactives. Clinical studies have shown reductions in waist circumference, body weight, and markers of metabolic inflammation. This growing body of evidence suggests that the foods we choose can influence much more than hunger or calorie intake. They can interact directly with the biological systems that regulate metabolism, fat storage, and energy balance. In other words, food is not just fuel, it can also act as a powerful metabolic signal that helps guide how the body manages fat. One of the most studied foods in metabolic research is something many people already drink every day: green tea. While green tea has long been praised in traditional cultures for its health benefits, modern science has begun to uncover exactly why it may be so powerful. Green tea contains a group of natural compounds called polyphenols, which are plant-based molecules known for their antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. Among these polyphenols is a particularly important compound called EGCG, short for epigallocatechin gallate. Although the name may sound complex, its effects in the body are surprisingly straightforward. Research has shown that EGCG can influence several important biological systems. First, it helps protect cells from oxidative stress, which can damage DNA and contribute to aging and disease. It also supports the immune system and helps reduce chronic inflammation. But what makes green tea especially interesting in metabolism research is its effect on body fat. Studies suggest that the catechins found in green tea can help reduce both subcutaneous fat, the fat beneath the skin, and visceral fat, the more dangerous fat stored around internal organs. These compounds appear to help the body break down stored fat more efficiently while also limiting the formation of new fat cells. Green tea may also support metabolic health by interacting with the gut microbiome. Some of its natural compounds act as prebiotics, helping beneficial gut bacteria grow and thrive. A healthier gut microbiome can improve digestion, regulate inflammation, and influence metabolic balance. Another interesting benefit of green tea is hydration. Since tea is primarily brewed in water, drinking it contributes to overall fluid intake. Proper hydration itself plays an important role in maintaining metabolic activity. Researchers have also discovered that consuming cold beverages such as iced tea or cold water may slightly increase metabolic activity. When cold liquid enters the stomach, the body must expend energy to warm it to core body temperature, which can stimulate calorie burning. While green tea alone is not a miracle solution, the research surrounding it illustrates a powerful concept. Certain foods can support the body's natural ability to regulate metabolism and manage harmful fat. While green tea itself is already known for its health benefits, there is another form of tea that may contain even higher concentrations of beneficial compounds. This tea is called matcha. Matcha is a type of powdered green tea that has been used in Japan for centuries, particularly in traditional tea ceremonies. What makes matcha unique is not only the way it is prepared, but also how the tea plant is grown and processed. About 3 to 4 weeks before harvest, farmers cover the tea plants with shade. This shading process forces the plant to adapt to lower sunlight levels. In response, the leaves begin producing significantly higher levels of protective compounds, especially polyphenols and catechins. These compounds are the same bioactive molecules responsible for many of green tea's metabolic benefits. When the leaves are harvested, they are carefully dried and ground into a fine powder. Unlike traditional tea, where the leaves are steeped and then discarded, matcha allows you to consume the entire leaf. That means you are ingesting all the polyphenols, antioxidants, and dietary fiber contained within the plant. Because of this process, matcha can contain 30 to 300 times more polyphenols than standard brewed green tea. Researchers have become increasingly interested in matcha because of its potential impact on metabolism and cellular health. Laboratory studies have shown that certain compounds in matcha may influence the behavior of harmful cells, including cancer stem cells. While much of this research is still in early stages, the findings highlight the remarkable biological activity of these plant compounds. Matcha also contains natural fibers and nutrients that support the gut microbiome. A healthy gut ecosystem plays an important role in metabolism, immune regulation, and inflammation control. All of these factors combine to make matcha a particularly concentrated source of beneficial bioactive compounds. The key takeaway is that foods are more than simple calories. Many plants contain complex chemical signals that interact with the body's metabolic systems. Matcha is a powerful example of how the way a food is grown, processed, and consumed can dramatically influence its impact on health. While green tea and matcha often receive the most attention, researchers have discovered that other types of tea can also support metabolism, sometimes in unexpected ways. In particular, fermented teas, such as oolong tea and pu'er tea, have shown intriguing metabolic effects. Many people assume that fermentation reduces the health benefits of tea, but modern research suggests that this assumption is not entirely correct. Oolong tea, which is partially fermented, contains a mix of compounds found in both green and black tea. Studies have shown that oolong tea may help increase energy expenditure and support fat metabolism. Some clinical observations suggest that regular consumption can lead to reductions in waist circumference and body fat percentage. One reason may be that oolong tea helps stimulate the body's brown fat, the specialized type of fat that burns energy instead of storing it. Brown fat functions like a small internal furnace, converting stored energy into heat. When brown fat becomes more active, the body naturally begins burning more calories. Even more surprising is the research surrounding pu'er tea, a deeply fermented tea that has been consumed in parts of China for centuries. Pu'er tea is traditionally aged and fermented using specific microbial processes, which change the chemical composition of the tea leaves. During fermentation, beneficial microorganisms develop within the tea. These microbes can produce compounds that support gut health and metabolism. Some scientists have identified probiotic-like bacteria associated with pu'er fermentation, suggesting that the tea may influence the gut microbiome in ways that promote metabolic balance. Studies have also indicated that compounds formed during pu'er fermentation may help regulate fat metabolism, reduce fat cell formation, and encourage the body to burn stored fat more efficiently. What makes this research particularly fascinating is that these traditional beverages have been consumed for hundreds of years, long before scientists understood their biochemical effects. Together, green tea, matcha, oolong, and pu'er illustrate a powerful concept. Certain natural compounds found in foods and beverages can interact with our metabolism in complex ways, helping the body regulate fat storage and energy use. When researchers began looking closely at foods and beverages that influence metabolism, a pattern started to emerge. Three simple drinks repeatedly appeared in scientific studies as powerful supporters of metabolic health: tea, coffee, and water. These three beverages form what some scientists describe as a kind of metabolic holy trinity. Let's start with coffee, one of the most widely consumed beverages in the world. Coffee contains a variety of bioactive compounds, including chlorogenic acid, a natural polyphenol that has been studied for its effects on metabolism and blood sugar regulation. Chlorogenic acid appears to help regulate how the body processes glucose and fat, while also supporting the body's natural defense systems. Coffee also contains caffeine, which can stimulate the central nervous system and temporarily increase metabolic rate. This stimulation can encourage the body to burn more energy throughout the day. However, caffeine tolerance varies from person to person, so individuals need to pay attention to how their bodies respond. Next is tea, which we discussed earlier. Green tea, matcha, oolong, and pu'er all contain polyphenols that support metabolic activity, reduce inflammation, and influence fat metabolism. These compounds can help activate brown fat, regulate fat stem cells, and support gut health. The third element is something even simpler: water. Water plays a crucial role in nearly every metabolic process in the body. Hydration supports circulation, digestion, and cellular function. But interestingly, drinking cold water may also stimulate metabolism. Inside the stomach is a temperature-sensitive mechanism that detects when something cold enters the body. When you drink cold water, the body must expend energy to warm that liquid to core body temperature. This process can slightly increase energy expenditure and activate brown fat. This doesn't mean water alone will cause dramatic weight loss, but it highlights how basic physiological processes can support metabolism when the body is properly hydrated. Together, tea, coffee, and water represent simple daily habits that may help support metabolic function. Rather than relying on extreme diets or complicated routines, these beverages show how small, consistent choices can influence how the body manages energy and fat. For decades, most conversations about fat have focused on a single idea: losing weight. But modern research is beginning to show that the real issue is not simply how much we weigh. The deeper question is how fat behaves inside the body. Fat is not just a passive storage system. It is a highly active tissue that interacts with blood vessels, hormones, and the immune system. In fact, fat tissue requires its own network of blood vessels to survive and expand. Scientists studying fat growth have observed something fascinating. When fat tissue begins to expand, it sends signals that stimulate the growth of new blood vessels. These vessels supply the fat cells with oxygen and nutrients, allowing the tissue to grow larger. However, when fat expands too quickly, the blood supply cannot always keep up with the growth. The center of the expanding fat mass may begin to suffer from low oxygen levels, a condition known as hypoxia. When this happens, the body reacts as if the tissue is under threat. Immune cells rush into the area, triggering inflammation. Over time, this persistent inflammation can spread throughout the body, contributing to chronic diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, and even certain cancers. This is why excess fat, especially visceral fat, is not just a cosmetic issue. It can become a biological driver of inflammation and metabolic disruption. What makes this discovery particularly important is that fat behaves in ways that are surprisingly similar to tumors. Both rely on blood vessel growth to expand. Both can trigger inflammatory responses when oxygen becomes limited, and both can influence the surrounding environment of the body. Understanding these mechanisms shifts the conversation about health. The goal is not simply to eliminate fat, because the body needs fat for protection, energy storage, and hormone balance. Instead, the real goal is to maintain healthy fat balance, keeping fat tissue regulated, preventing excessive visceral fat accumulation, and supporting metabolic systems that keep the body functioning properly. This perspective allows us to focus on metabolism, nutrition, and biological balance rather than simply chasing numbers on a scale.